My name is Nicole Kilburn, and I'm an anthropologist in the School of Arts and Science at Camosun College. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples, where our college campuses are located. It's a real honor to be able to work for and with these communities. So I'm an archaeologist by training. I started doing fieldwork in Central America. I've also done fieldwork in the American Southwest, and I now do fieldwork here in British Columbia. I'm also a food anthropologist. That gives me the opportunity to think about things like power, identity, colonization, globalization, all through the lens of food. More on that in a minute. The point that I want to make here right off the top, though, is that when I was graduating from high school, I didn't think that I was going to become an anthropologist. My career has really evolved through a combination of chance, opportunity, and hard work. Now, if you're like me, that question of what you're going to do when you grow up is enough to induce a panic attack. So much uncertainty and so much pressure. What am I good at? What am I interested in? How do I figure this out without wasting precious time? So here is my disclaimer, my bias. When it comes to learning, I don't think that you can waste your time. I would argue that your first many semesters of post-secondary education should be an exploration for you to figure out what you might like to do with the working part of your life. And hopefully you're going to find something that you are good at, something that is fulfilling, something that you enjoy getting to learn about. And my pitch is that Camosun School of Arts and Science is a really great place for that exploration. So as I said, I'm a food anthropologist, which probably explains why all of you are being handed a delicious chocolate chip cookie. I am going to argue that your post-secondary education may be represented in this delicious treat. What? You can't see your experience in post-secondary represented here? Well, my task is to show you the hidden ingredients of this cookie and how they represent the exploration that you can be doing in a post-secondary setting like Camosun School of Arts and Science. This cookie is made with a wide variety of ingredients, but the biggest single ingredient is wheat. Wheat is grown across the prairies here in North America, but the price is determined by a combination of factors. So climate, yield, oil prices, and exports. In Canada, we have both federal and provincial agricultural policies that are intended to serve a wide variety of both economic and political goals. The new trilateral trade agreement, the USMCA, that replaces NAFTA, offers significant opportunities for some of our farmers when it comes to accessing markets. The Alberta Wheat Association says that the US and Mexico already are recipients of more than 15% of our wheat exports. So this tells us that agreements like this are pretty significant. This is the realm of political science, where the multi-layered networks of our political structures can be identified and considered. Wheat production consumes about 800 billion cubic meters of water every year. Wheat production consumes about 12% of the global water usage for crop production, which is pretty incredible. The cookie that you have in front of you represents about 13 liters of water, and that's just for the wheat. Things get a lot more complex if we also factor in the water usage that's associated with the dairy cows for our butter, or the poultry that's associated with the eggs. Now, all of these are going to have significant consequences environmentally, and this requires planning for both sustainability and remediation. This is the sort of thing that you can learn about in Camosun's 2-year environmental technology program. Now, other ingredients aren't so local, coming to the kitchen from thousands of kilometers away. Take vanilla as an example. Did you know that that vanilla flavor actually starts out as a fruit from an orchid? Vanilla was originally domesticated in Mexico, but today, because of the history of colonization, about 85% of vanilla beans are grown in Madagascar, which is a small island off the east coast of Africa. Vanilla beans are slow to mature and hard to grow, so they demand a high price. Currently, its value is at about $300 a pound. That's more than the value of silver. So it's not too surprising that a gentleman like this is going to be growing vanilla as a cash crop. Now, Madagascar, like many other parts of the world, is experiencing the devastating consequences of climate change. In 2017, Madagascar experienced a pretty intense cyclone, and 30% of the vanilla crop was destroyed. Not only did this spark global shortages and price spikes that were felt by consumers, it bankrupted farmers and led to an increase in thievery in Madagascar itself. These environmental and human components are the sorts of things that you could be learning about in geography classes. Thousands of poor farmers rely on growing vanilla and other cash crops, creating ingredients that are very familiar to us as consumers. Chocolate would be another example of this. So cacao today predominantly is grown in West Africa. About 85% of commercial cacao is going to be grown on the west coast of the continent of Africa. And the vast majority of that cacao is grown by small farmers that basically live on about $2 a day. The price of cacao is incredibly low because it's set by the global commodities market. And so for these poor farmers to make any type of profit, the labor needs to be free or almost free. And the easiest place to find that labor is amongst children. Both the farmers' children, but also children that are provided by traffickers. Children spend their days climbing trees and swinging machetes to cut the cacao pods loose. Large bags filled with these pods need to be hauled to central locations. It should be pretty clear that this does not leave much time for schooling. These children have few opportunities to break the cycle of poverty. If you're interested in learning about social justice issues or the structures of power and inequality, I would suggest that you take an anthropology class. These topics are also covered in sociology classes and global studies classes, so you're able to think about them from a variety of different angles. Cacao is interesting. It's a fermented food. The beans spend about a week stewing in their own sugary pulp, generally on the forest floor covered with large leaves. Microbes feed on the sugars and fuel the fermentation process, which infuses the beans with a wide variety of different flavors. This is the realm of microbiology. An unsung hero here is salt. Important in that it balances out the sweetness, but also strengthens the proteins in the dough, making your cookie chewy. Salt generally comes in two forms, in seawater and in rock salt. Rock salt is found in vast beds of evaporate minerals that are the result of the evaporation that happens in enclosed lakes, lagoons, and seas. This is the domain of geoscience, which studies the history and structures of our planet and its natural systems. Geoscience offers us the understanding and knowledge to find resources and use them sustainably today and into the future. Okay, so what else can we learn from our cookie? Well, this is Ruth Wakefield, and we have her to thank for the chocolate chip cookie. We actually have two people to thank. There were two women that invented this recipe, one a chef and another a business owner, both of which were unusual in the 1930s in the United States. The cookie was invented when Ruth owned the popular Toll House Inn in Whitman, Massachusetts. Popularity for the Toll House chocolate crunch cookie really skyrocketed during World War II, when soldiers from the Eastern Seaboard enjoyed getting these cookies in their care packages and shared them with soldiers from other parts of the United States. This fits really nicely into both gender and women's studies and history. We find that baking is still gendered knowledge and work. Personally, my grandma is the best baker in the world. I'm imagining many of you guys can say the same thing. So much to explore, and this before the ingredients even make it into the kitchen. The real magic of a chocolate chip cookie comes down to science. Don't be fooled. A baker's apron is just another type of lab coat. Baking is science in action. It begins with measuring out your ingredients and following a recipe. As we'll see, the individual ingredients all have important roles to play. But wouldn't it be embarrassing and disappointing if I didn't have enough cookies to share with all of you? Doubling and tripling a recipe to make sure that there are enough to go around requires math. When you put the raw cookie dough into the oven, you're setting off a cascade of chemical and physical reactions. The cookie baking process represents a variety of concepts that are taught by my colleagues in biochemistry, chemistry, and physics. First up is the spread. As that round ball of dough heats up, it loses its structural integrity as the butter melts, hence the spread. The diameter of the cookie is going to be set by how long it spreads, but it can't expand forever, so what makes it stop? Well, that's the job of the egg. As the dough heats up, the proteins in the egg get all tangled up with one another, creating a firm, solid structure, kind of like the skeleton of the cookie. Next up is the rise. At about 212 degrees Fahrenheit, the water inside the dough turns to steam and the cookie begins to rise. The baking soda inside the cookie starts to break down into carbon dioxide and the cookie rises even more. These gases leave bubbles and holes, which is going to contribute to the cookie being lighter. Things get really interesting just as the cookie is almost finished baking. A combination of two chemical reactions infuse the cookie with a wide variety of flavors and give the cookie that lovely golden color. Caramelization is where the sugars transform from clear, odorless crystals into a brown, fragrant liquid that's just brimming with aromas and tastes. Think butterscotch. The Maillard reaction involves not only the sugars in the dough, but the proteins in the egg and the flour as well. It churns out toasty and nutty flavors and is going to help create that dark brown color on the surface of the cookie. Now, how would you feel if I had brought a whole bunch of cookies into this room, showed them to you, but told you that you couldn't eat them? This is essentially what happened in a psychology experiment where researchers were trying to study willpower. In the first part of the experiment, participants were put in a room with that incredible smell of freshly baked cookies and plates of these delicious treats. One half of the group was allowed to indulge in these cookies, while the other half was told that they had to eat radishes instead. In the second part of the experiment, participants were asked to engage in a seemingly unrelated exercise that included a persistence testing puzzle. The results between the two groups were quite stark. The group that had been made to eat radishes made far fewer attempts and spent less than half the time trying to solve the puzzle relative to individuals that had been allowed to indulge in these delicious treats. Researchers concluded that the people that had had to not eat these delicious cookies were simply too tired to engage in another torturous act. Researchers concluded that self-control is like a muscle. It loses its strength after exertion, it gets depleted, at least in the short term, and it's ineffectual. Now, philosophers could argue that choosing not to eat a cookie has more to do with morality and living one's values. You're all familiar with how our worldviews structure the choices that we make, and this is certainly the case with food. But things can get a little bit tricky. If you're a vegetarian because you have decided that you don't want to contribute to the inhumane treatment of animals in an industrial food system, why would you not eat chicken, but you'll eat the egg that we've established is such a critical aspect of this cookie? Why would you not eat hamburger, but you'll eat the butter that creates that soft, chewy texture to this cookie? Philosophy is all about exploring these big questions. The morality piece extends this exploration via our cookie even further. Do you remember that annoying rhyming game from childhood, the Who Stole the Cookie from the Cookie Jar? Sounds like the realm of criminal justice to me. In this 2-year program, you can explore how the justice system responds to crime and deviance, including policing, corrections, and the law. In this case, you could explore the fate of Cookie Monster, the social conditions that led to the offense, and whether this was an opportunistic act or a crime that is more deliberate. My colleagues in the communications department would have suggested that I conduct a focus group to determine the best type of cookie to use for this presentation based on audience demographic. I apologize, I blazed ahead and I made the decision myself, a pretty risky move from a marketing perspective. But maybe you now want to share your chocolate chip cookie experience with the world. Social media and digital media and communications classes are here to help. Memes, tweets, posts, learning how to market and communicate a brand or product to the world requires learning about the best type of photo composition, language, and overall marketing pitch. I think it's pretty clear at this point that a cookie is rarely just a cookie. As we consider its communicative value, we need to think about the cookie as a material object with different meanings based on who's holding it and what it's meant to represent. This is really important in visual arts, where students are taught to be creative problem solvers and to think about what the cookie is meant to be representing and how it should be interpreted. What is it representing in your art piece, be it a photograph or a film or a performance? Is it representing something playful from childhood, or is it pushing back against nostalgia? I think it's safe to say that this cookie has provided us with an unexpected story with multiple dimensions. All the ingredients that I've mentioned have their own roles to play. They all have their own purpose. Using the chocolate chip cookie as a metaphor, wait a minute, has it been a metaphor or an analogy? The English department would certainly be able to help us out with this. At any rate, I hope that using the cookie as a lens has been useful to help you understand many of the key components of the School of Arts and Science. In particular, holism, so the idea of different concepts being interrelated, and relevance. I hope that it's given you some food for thought. What do you want to explore, and how can we help? Thank you.